know, Robert, what I went through. I had hair before I went to China. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Carol. It's great fun to talk about China. I first went there in 1992. I really wasn't actively pursuing work there, but 1992 was a bad year here in New York. We were about a third of the staff that we had just a year or two before. And I had a long-term relationship with Richard Gluckman, who called me up one day. And he said, Bruce, I have a former employee who grew up in Taiwan, but he was educated here in the States, and half of his family stayed in Shanghai in 1949 and half escaped to Taiwan, and he has a cousin who happens to be a vice president of the largest bank in China, in Shanghai. And they need a Western architect. Are you interested? So I said, sure. And so I met with his former employee, Chuan Lu, and we decided that we would go for it. And we formed a little kind of partnership with the three people, but Richard at that point was basically doing smaller gallery work, and so this was high-rise architecture was not something he was accustomed to. So we took the lead, and Antoine and I went over to Shanghai, met the vice president of the bank, or the chairman of the bank, number 2 or number 1, I can't remember exactly, who was very well-traveled, well-educated, he seemed to know Western ways, so I felt like I was talking to a colleague, and I was very excited, and he talked about how the premier had said that we are going to be developing Pudong in Shanghai as our next economic development zone, and we don't want another Shenzhen, meaning that the Chinese architecture in Shenzhen was not up to the standard that the premier was looking for. So we assured him that we could help him make it something other than that. And I actually came back on that first trip with a signed contract, and we started work. It was all extremely exciting. Now I have some slides that are not always very clear because of 2 or 3 reasons. One was that I was taking them with a kind of a pocket-sized push-here dummy camera, so I could keep it in my pocket. Also, we had to convert slides to PowerPoint. And the weather isn't always so great in China, so it was a little foggy at times, to put it mildly. So just starting with tradition, this is the little background on what we found when we got there. I mean, this was the traditional high-rise building in Shanghai, which is the pagoda. It was the religious symbol. And it was something which really had not been surpassed anyway up until, well, certainly the beginning of the 19th century. But then, and you see the building on the left, that's the Peace Hotel, which used to be the tallest building in Shanghai. It was right on the Bund, which is the Huangpu River that sweeps through Shanghai. And actually faces directly over to Pudong. And Shanghai was a colonial city. It was an amazing collection. It was very close to New York in many ways, as Bob says, a French concession. There was a German area, a French area, a Dutch area, a kind of an international area, a lot of which was being preserved, or they were interested in thinking about preserving it at that time. And the slide in the middle is kind of typical of how these older buildings that had originally replicated Pagoda were beginning to be commercialized. And of course, electronic signage was taking over. Bob mentioned the architecture at that time. What happened was that the Cultural Revolution was only about 12 or 15 years before 1992. And the architects had either been, the architecture profession, they were 50 years or older and had been trained by the Soviets. So so they knew only how to do concrete kind of bunker housing things. Or they had been trained by, they were 35 years or younger, trained by basically reading Western magazines, Western books, architectural record, things like that. And they had no understanding of what Western architecture was about, but they were always trying to imitate it. And occasionally, like you see in the building on the left, that is actually, they call the Great Wall building. And that's a little replica of the Great Wall. So this is their sort of, their, what they considered a token heritage. They didn't really understand their own heritage. They didn't understand what else was going on in the world. The building in the middle was kind of a Pompidou knockoff. And the building on the right is, if you can see it, you can see the two little spires on the top. That's a direct knockoff from I.M. Pei's Bank of China building in Hong Kong. So it was difficult to find rapport, and there was, of course, there was a lot of resentment. In fact, Western architects coming in. I was okay when I was talking at the upper management level, but as soon as I got into middle management, I could sort of, you could feel the body language, like, you know, why are we doing anything to help this guy? And it was a challenge. This is just some of the character of the street life. It was all bicycles. There were very few cars. It was beautiful because it was like lava flowing through the streets with this slow movement of bicycles. And you could get anywhere in no time, except that my colleague, Enchuan, refused to ride a bicycle, so we waited about 45 minutes to get a cab to take about a 5-minute ride, but eventually we sorted it out. And you can see on the upper right the kind of squalor that people lived in, and this was the lifestyle. My cousin of my colleague, Enchuan, lived in a house not unlike what you see on the right. It wasn't quite that much of a slum effect, but he had been had been told to live in one of the brand new white high-rises that the government had built, and he refused to do it. He still owned it, but he refused to do it. He wanted to live in his old house. These are views. I'm not sure this was in '92. It might have been a little later, because I know the picture, I believe the building right in the middle at the top is the Portland Hotel. And I know I stayed there on my first trip, so this was obviously a later trip from a different hotel. But you can see the mix of high-rises and these low-rise neighborhoods, some of which had been preserved, like down at the bottom. If you can see that, I believe that's from the French area, which was the finest. And you can see some nice housing in the one in the middle. There were some beautiful areas, but at the time they were just starting to barrel through with elevated highways, which were fine. Elevated highways, they sort of got that idea from Hong Kong, but the buildings in Hong Kong are all 40 or 50 stories tall, and the two-story houses, the neighborhoods that were next to these highways were just buried in the shadows of these new structures. And it was kind of a brutalist approach to urban planning. And this is a early plan that I had photographed. The black line that you see around the perimeter is actually the perimeter road, and you can see where the tower is. I can actually do that. You can see that's where the communications tower is, and this is the Pudong area, right in there. And the Bund is right, the traditional area is right along. You get the idea. And then elevated highway, that loop road is all elevated. The yellow road is elevated. The red, I believe, was a subway system, but it was all starting under construction about the same time. 2 minutes to go. Uh-oh. Okay. Thought we had extra time. Oh, we didn't. Okay. All right. This is a picture looking across at the Bund from looking across at Pudong on the top. This is the first bridge that was connected. It was a Korean engineering firm that did that. And then from the bottom, you can see the actual site of Pudong across the river. This was my first experience. We went over there and drove through the mud, got to the shed that you see on the upper right. walked into this, they closed the door, walked into a black room, and all of a sudden the sound and light started, and they had this huge model, 12-foot model of the communications tower that you see in the bottom left, and then the group that's on the right. We then went to the planning office in Pudong, and this was an early shot. I was not allowed to photograph the model, which is the size of the stage, and I really laid it into them, very politely told them that they hadn't learned anything from all the mistakes that we had done in the rest of the world in planning, because there was no separation of pedestrian, no place for bicycles. There was a total change of culture, totally auto-dependent, and I think they listened to me. And this was some of the photographs of the buildings that had been proposed on the left, and this was the chief planner and I with our triumphant gesture at the end of our meeting to say that we were going to move forward and we were going to make things much better. We then met with ACADI, the East China Architectural Design Institute. The top picture is signing a contract with them. The middle picture is their total CAD room. We had to go through a glass door, take our shoes off to go into the CAD room. The rest of it, where you see down below, is the cafeteria, but that was sort of the character of the whole space. This was a site that we were working on. There was one tall building, which happened to be next to our site. And this was some of the schematic plans that we developed, but we had no sense of the context. We had no sense of what was going to happen next door or behind us. So we basically decided, and we had a height limit of 100 meters, decided that we needed to just make it a jewel for whatever might happen in the future. This was the meeting where I made the presentation to the entire government assembly for the planning and getting the approval of the project. And these are the actual photographs. It took 10 years for it to get completed, but it was completed, and we were very lucky in that we had a local architect with the East China Institute who was very loyal, very faithful to our design, which we had carried through the design development phase. These are some of the detail shots. You can see we made gestures to be a little Chinese, not something which has happened too much since. Some of the interior shots. It was actually what we would, as far as we know, the first green project in China. We certainly labeled it that. There were many things that we did with the brise and so forth. Control sunlight, daylight, and so forth. And hopefully set a new direction there. This was a later time, in 1994, when I went to visit them planning office, and they showed me their redesign of new master plan, which had responded a little bit. And then the vice premier was coming in the next day to come and look at the results of a competition that they had asked 4 planners to do from different parts of the country to come up with a master plan. Now, Pudong was already half under construction, but they were still trying to come up with a master plan, which is really clear. The upper left, as you can imagine, is an Italian scheme. They couldn't translate the Italian person's name, so they had no idea who it was. Which looks like a wonderful little Italian mountain village, except those are 30-story buildings, all those blocks. The upper right is Richard Rogers' scheme, which is a 1 mile wide diameter. And then he had these nodes all the way around. And this was supposed to be something that evolved over 25 years, but it was obviously a very rigid concept. And then on the lower left was a French scheme, which was actually like this linear base of commercial that could grow forever and then have residential on the top. And the lower right was a Japanese scheme, which actually was a great idea because it was just like rows of corn here and peas here and different uses of these rows, and it could grow and grow and grow until they got to the China Sea, which was many miles away. But when I asked them which scheme they were doing, they said, well, it's going to be a combination of Chinese scheme and Richard Rogers scheme. Hard to imagine, but that's what they did. This was just progress photos as I was going there for 3 years. This was how the television tower was evolving. I actually before I left, I got to the bottom ball. and saw the view, which was spectacular. This is as you see it today. Amazing transformation. And then after, we then started reaching out to Tanji University, where Bob is on the board. We had a relationship with them, we signed the deal, we had a big celebration, and we tried a few projects, but it didn't get that much further. And these are other projects, competitions that we did. These are the red dots with the different areas of China that we activated. And then more recently, we entered the competition where the Gensler